Right, changing times, the policy context. There is a huge amount of legislation going through government. There's legislation that currently exists, and there are principles of government that are going to affect community and town councils over the next 3 to 4 years, seismic changes. I'll start off with the Welsh Government Central Organising Principle, which is around one planet, one Wales, one planet. There's a huge sustainable development agenda being pushed out by Welsh Government, and I said in my first letter to all councils in Wales, 2 days into my role, there was 2 areas that community and town councils needed to have expertise. One was around the whole SD agenda, and the other one was around community engagement. And I certainly hold those values. We've got the local government measure. We have the power of wellbeing consultation and guidance that has come out. There's some unfinished business there. I think we were, as a sector, very disappointed to find out that the power of wellbeing was still going to be limited to Section 137 financial limitations. And One Voice will certainly be discussing with Welsh Government how we can move forward to perhaps create greater innovation through the use of the power of wellbeing. We've got the local government democracy and planning bills that are going through. One Voice Wales, we've lobbied hard around resources around the local government democracy bill. I'll come on to that later in the presentation. On the planning bill, there's huge opportunities. Gareth's referenced about working and starting the pyramid, but starting from the bottom up. And I think that is that's something that we are very much arguing for as a sector and as a representational body. The Future Generations Bill, the former Sustainable Development Bill, 2017, we're likely to have an SD duty placed on our sector. There are huge amounts of work that need to be done in terms of developing our capacity, skills and knowledge as a sector. The current financial climate, we see it every day it seems to be getting more gloomy. But every cloud is a silver lining, and I think there are opportunities for the sector in this environment. The Devolution of Services agenda, asset transfers, only Tuesday I had an email from one unitary authority saying we're going to have a meeting next week with all the community and town councils about how we can get them to take on leisure centres, parks, children's play areas, and all by April, of course. So you've all got the capacity and knowledge and skills and the resources to do this at the drop of a hat, of course. And the real game changer is the bottom one about the Public Services Commission review, and I'll come on to that in the presentation. I gave evidence on Thursday to the Commission, to Sir Paul Williams, Commission chairs that, and that response to the Commission will be available to all community and town councils. Quite comprehensive, about a 21-page submission to the Commission. The current environment. Make no mistake about it, it's a competitive environment. What do I mean by a competitive environment? I mean that other national bodies are looking at the ground that is ours, in terms of our powers, and are starting to encroach on it. Because of the financial pressures, everyone's trying to get in on what actually is the natural territory of community and town councils. I'll be quite adversarial in some respects, but the WCVA recently launched a Street Ambassadors programme. I actually agree with the idea of the Street Ambassadors programme, but if you look at what they're suggesting that these people do, actually, it's what all you do already. So it's competitive. So I know when I'm going to government and asking them for funding, there's another body over there that's also going to be asking them for funding to do almost something that we do, but not on a statutory basis. Reducing finances. The WLGA commissioned a report last year from the Institute of Fiscal Studies. It is the doom and gloom report. Our mega then is 2021. We'd have lost approximately £500 million off the revenue support grant for the unitary authorities. That's tantamount to 10% of existing budget. So who's going to do that work in the future? We're not going to be able to take it up as a sector. That would be a 10-fold increase in our precepting within Wales. At best, we're precepting around 50 million as a sector. So there's a lot of work to be done. But those reducing finances do provide us with opportunities, because there are potential ways of doing it differently. And Gareth and myself and Lee Cecil in the audience are certainly having those sorts of conversations about how things could be done differently in a different co-produced way at the local level. There is certainly a pressure to support what works. What do I mean by what works? Most of the discussions I'm having in advisory boards with Welsh Government colleagues in the various divisions is about pragmatism. It's about how can we get the best value for the pound. and for the public, for the public out there and for the electorate. And increasingly we're looking at best practice and case studies and how we can share that and how we can make sure that it's engendered into all sectors. So everything is potentially up for grabs. The Public Services Commission will be probably a game changer in terms of their report. I think it's fairly common knowledge. The language that's being espoused across Wales now is about fewer unitary authorities. If it's fewer unitary authorities, and they're going to be doing the big structural sort of infrastructure, maybe taking on social care, perhaps taking on bigger roles around education, the other services that are left will come as no surprise to any of you. There's a coterminosity between the sort of environmental, leisure, with the powers that exist within community and town councils. And certainly the Public Services Commission on Thursday were very interested to hear about where we felt the future lies. I'll come on to that later in the presentation. So these are some of the legislative changes. They're game changers. So the big challenges. I've touched on this. Asset and service devolution. I still maintain that the huge guidance manual that One Voice Wales has around service devolution, which just says no, is the right manual to use at the moment. We're arguing with Welsh Government that there is a need for a model, a framework around due diligence, around how assets or services can be passed from one public body to another, and especially in relation to our sector. It doesn't exist at present, and that needs to be done very quickly, because when we've got unitary authority saying, can you take on services now, and we as a representative body cannot cope with the volume of requests around that agenda. It'll be physically impossible for One Voice Wales to advise on everything. And that sounds very negative, but it's a fact. We need more resources in this area. I'll be quite controversial. I'll skip over public services because I'll come back to that. Vibrant places, interesting. With the launch of Vibrant Places, vibrant and viable places in Wales. It's about town centre regeneration. And there's no reference to town councils helping and supporting that town centre regeneration in the document whatsoever. There's an absence of our sector in regenerating the places we live in. How bizarre is that? So that's a challenge for us as a representative body in making people aware of the role that the community and town council sector can play in the future. I've mentioned community engagement. This is going to be critical to the future. If you're going to precept, you're going to have undertake community engagement. You've got to know what your electorate wants before you precept. You're going to be challenged in the future. I remember seeing a presentation by Derek Evans from Wales Audit Office about a year and a half ago. We were saying about the regulations that are being brought in by Hugh Vaughan-Thomas. Yes, there's going to be more regulation for our sector because there's an anticipation we're going to be taking on more. And if we're going to be taking on more, we better be prepared to be able to justify why we've precepted X or Y amount. And that needs to be predicated by solid evidence base based on our community's needs. Community planning, we are making a very strong play as a national representative body. I've been part of the Planning Bill Management Development Advisory Board for Welsh Government. And Richard talked about getting involved early in the process. The position from One Voice Wales was about having assurance and certainty within the process. And actually, that at the beginning of the process, it's clear to elected representatives how they can engage with that local development planning process. Joint working and collaboration. It's going to be critical to the future. I've probably put some fairly harsh words into the Public Services Commission on Thursday about the current state of affairs between community and town councils and unitary authorities in relation to charters. Primarily, we've got charters. We've got 12 of them. They're not moving at the pace that One Voice Wales would like because we are pushing the agenda. It isn't a two-way street. But what we are certainly seeing is charters that are in place, and then the unitary authorities not paying any heed to the charters that are in place and not consulting appropriately with with community and town councils. So there's a job of work to be done. Taking up new roles, there could be bigger roles for us in the future around scrutiny, particularly. There's a number of reports that have been commissioned through Welsh Government and by the unitary authorities themselves. I was in a presentation some time ago where one of the leaders of one of the unitary authorities said, we haven't got enough councillors in our county councils to do scrutiny effectively. And then I stood up and said, well, there's 8,000 community councillors out there that can help you. And that didn't go down too well, I can assure you. But hey-ho, we're putting ourselves on the map. The last one about building capacity to meet future expectations. This is critical for the sector. We don't precept at the moment enough for our own training and staff needs. We've done the surveys. We did the survey last year, a big one. And 6 in 10 councils are not precepting at all to put a training budget together, either for their clerk or for themselves. And that's not about One Voice Wales saying, if you do that, it means more money comes into One Voice Wales. It isn't about that. We don't make much money out of training. We don't charge enough. But it's there because it's a necessity. And in the current environment, we need councillors to be fully aware, with the knowledge and the capacity to deal with what's coming over the hill. Tendering, commissioning, health and safety, supervisory management, and a few other things to boot. This has died. Oh, there we go. So, catch up with me now, I think. There we go. So some of the challenges. We've got to dispel some of the myths. We are seen as a club, as community councils, as gentlemen's clubs in some respects, to be controversial. We are seen as gatekeepers, obstructive, and we've got to change that image of the sector. For me, it's about defining our role. It's about having clarity of purpose. In terms of defining our role, there's some really good pieces of work that have been done academically, which suggest of the 400 plus services that are delivered through unitary authorities, about 40 lend themselves easily to local determination. And shock horror, the 40 neatly align with the 40 odd powers that community and town councils have got. So we're making a strong argument that the Simpson Review, for example, didn't go far enough. It looked at national, it looked at regional, it looked at local. We argued that local wasn't unitary authority. There's another level, the very local. And I think that's winning hearts and minds at the moment. And in terms of clarity of purpose, I listened to a speech a couple of weeks ago at a conference I was at, where the conference speaker sort of said, the problem with our organisation was it hadn't been given a clarity of purpose. And that's what's really happened in the last 40 years for community and town councils. We've got council, tax and unitary authorities in the current bureaucracies, and they're responsible for all the things that we're also responsible for. So when people say to me, Lynn, your sector doesn't do a lot, does it really, And I say, well, let me tell you what the structural issues we've got. Why would my sector precept for services that are already delivered through another body? Why would they go and tax again at the local level to do more of it? Why would they? And I think we have been a risk-averse sector, and I think, there needs to be a little bit more ambition. So what should our core competencies be as a sector? Right, I'm going to have to rattle on here. I've been when I've been out and about and on the advisory boards and working with stakeholder organisations, recommending that our sector should have about 10 core competencies, and I will really go through these. The one is about taking up a community leadership role, and that community leadership role being on the basis of being asset-led. It's about knowing what assets a community has and putting it to best effect. There are situations where, and even in my own community, where there are a number of buildings that are run by organisations and that are used for maybe 10, 20% at best of the time during the week, and it's vacant the rest. How can we actually use this asset in our communities to better effect, so that we put the public first to better effect? Achieving fairness for everyone. The anti-poverty agenda. How does this apply to our sector? Well, there are examples, and this is what I say about best practice and sharing it and getting others to do it in our sector. There are examples of community councils, parish councils in England, who've set up oil consortia, and actually oil purchasing consortia, and that's actually reduced fuel bills for residents in those areas by up to 30%. So there's an idea. We can take up that role. Empowering local governance, youth councils. I've gone on record and said this many times. If I had my way, I'd make it mandatory there's a youth council attached to every community and town council in Wales, because youth will give us a fresh perspective, a different set of eyes on what's required in communities. Increasing resources for community benefit. We've done some work a couple of years ago with Aberystwyth University, researching, what role for community and town councils. There's a huge facilitation role, and there's a huge role in terms of feasibility studies and funding feasibility studies for social enterprises or social entrepreneurs within communities to act and actually pay money back into community town councils. It's about enjoying locally relevant services. I've touched on the WAO and the need for evidence-based decision making. We've got to have that. We can go out, it might only be once a year, do an engagement with our local communities, understand what their needs are, and then precept on that basis. It's just eminently sensible. None of this is rocket science. Enriching social capital and well-being. I've used the term community and town councils could be social venture capitalists. And what I mean is that why can't we precept, if we've got a good evidence base, why can't we precept, say, 10% of the cost to seed fund a social entrepreneur setting up a creche facility to cater for a need that perhaps young women in a community can't go into employment because there's no creche facilities. And there are examples of that. Valuing local distinctiveness, historic heritage, tourism, huge role for us around that. I was in Cadwallader Town Council not so long ago and saw a huge range of leaflets and promotional materials around historic heritage. It's about valuing what's around us and actually using those resources to best effect. It encourages people into those communities. It has knock-on effects because local businesses benefit. Cafes have greater footfall. So, you know, scratching each other's backs, there's a big role for us in that environment. Developing reliable infrastructure. I know we've got colleagues from Pentland Partnership, I can see them at the back there, and, you know, around developing one-stop shops, where in areas of Wales there is now an absence of other public services. GPs' surgeries have been closed, police stations have closed. You know, places for our communities to interact with other bodies are starting to disappear. We can take up that mantle as a sector. Supporting a dynamic local economy, enhancing environmental capacity, sustainable development, biodiversity. There's a huge opportunity again for the sector around getting involved with this One Voice Wales. This is our second programme now with the Climate Change Commission and Canol Cymru, where we're looking at issues around community resilience. And again, some of the information from that will form best practice and case studies we'll pass back out to the sector. Supporting the local economy. Reference has been made to youth today. The last 30, 40 years, youth budgets in every administration have been reduced. And there are loads, and Gareth alluded to it, there are loads of organisations who are operating in this field. Almost too many. And actually, I think we need to make a play for that, because I've told about the competitive environment. I think it's an area that community and town councils could support through precepting, mentoring programmes for the youth that exist within their communities. And there might be other benefits through democratic renewal and engaging younger people in the democratic process as a consequence. Place plans. Richard mentioned Shropshire and place plans. It's certainly something that's been tasking my mind, and it's certainly something that I've had lots of discussions with Peter Davis, Sustainable Futures Commissioner. We are represented on his advisory panel, Welsh Government Advisory Panel, and we sort of think that place planning is the next step for community and town councils. We've got single integrated planning. Single integrated planning is a top-down process at present. It's led by the unitary authorities. There's a universality of approach. However, what it doesn't do at present is harness the knowledge, skills that exist in the room here and in communities across Wales. And we think that place planning, i.e. communities and towns developing plans for their local area, could support supplementary planning guidance into the future. And these are some of the sort of areas that we think should be included in the place plans for community and town councils. It's about having like a business plan for your area. So, working in partnership. I don't know if you can see that. It does feel like that on occasions. What's One Voice Wales doing about the whole agenda? I'm not going to go through them all. There's a cool raft of things that One Voice Wales, as a national representative body, are now involved in. In fact, I could probably go over the page 2 or 3 times on the various bodies that we are represented in now. We are a very vocal voice within government. I don't think we were several years ago. I don't think we were probably doing the sector justice. I like to think we are now. The Public Services Commission Governance and Delivery Review. I'll rattle through these. I had an hour with the Commission on Thursday. As I say, the full report we make available to all community and town councils. These views were discussed with the executive, colleagues, and have been sort of devised over a number of months. This is not an absolute, the top one. Reduce the number of local government principal areas to no more than 8. It's not an absolute, but I think the view is that there's too many at the moment. There's too much duplicity within the system. And actually, by having perhaps fewer, doing more strategic things, provides an opportunity for something being done better at the local and actually giving our sector much greater clarity of purpose. Aim for contiguous boundaries between the principal areas, health administrative areas. This is about just simplifying the maps. At the moment, the maps are very different. You know, administrative boundaries of different public bodies, they overlap. It makes planning almost impossible. We want that to sort of be dispelled. Ensure that no community and town councils boundaries cross over those boundaries. So we are part of a distinct single integrated planning area, for example, or spatial planning area, and that there is a hierarchy of how we can support that planning process. We certainly think that there's an argument to be made that community and town councils should exist across the whole of Wales. There's 22 unitary authorities. There's not a vacant area of Wales that hasn't got a public body supporting it. You know, why shouldn't that be the same for our sector? Certainly, there should not be a presumption about abolishing small community councils. We're very much of the view that having 735 community and town councils has value for the communities of Wales. Sovereignty should be retained, but there may be different ways of clustering our sector to actually be the recipients of perhaps services that are currently delivered by others. I've touched on the scrutiny. Certainly there's a scrutiny role for us. Certainly there's a need for a focus on bottom-up community planning. And I've talked about potentially having a framework for devolution, but also having a framework for partnership. We've made in our submission a strong case for outcome-based accountability. Some people in the room will be familiar with that model for performance management in public bodies. But we certainly think that if that was applied across all public bodies and then conveyed to the stakeholder, third sector, voluntary sector organisations as well, there'd be clarity about how we all do planning within communities. We certainly want to see more devolution of powers, responsibility and finance. We've got an SD duty in 2017. But, as I pointed out when the bill came out, of the public bodies in Wales that are referencing it that will have to comply with the duty, we were the only part of the public services, statutory sector, only part of the public services family that did not receive some form of direct central government support into community and town councils. I was asked the question, why don't community and town councils do more? And I answered on Thursday, well, if we had our precept and then another 80% on top revenue support grant, we'd do a lot more. But we are limited by our financial structures. So the core strategic costs of local council should be met. That's our view. Audit, community engagement, financial matters, performance, organisational development, training costs. It shouldn't be about having to precept locally. It's about actually recognising that government, if they want democracy to work, have got to pay for it. Democracy costs. In terms of considering any appropriate reorganisation of community and town councils, we've mentioned clustering as a model, and I think the work that's gone on in Pendlin is pioneering. It's certainly a model that I think it has value for the future for the sector. There is no way on earth that government is going to give 735 councils powers to deliver services at that level. But what they may consider is large geographies, populations of maybe around 25,000 that would perhaps come together and form a cluster to perhaps take on the whole grass cutting contract in that area or street lighting in that area. Place planning, well, I've talked about that already. And the last one, and no surprise to you, we certainly feel that One Voice Wales needs to be funded more so that we've got sufficient resources. I don't want empires like Gareth. I don't want 50 staff. But at the moment, we could do with maybe 3 or 4 more in key strategic areas to support some of the agendas that are facing the sector. Certainly around the devolution of services, I'd love to have a full-time member of staff just to deal with what's coming over the hill in that area. Sorry. Couple of slides. Just to wrap up, in terms of the future, Very much in terms of One Voice Wales, we are about driving the ambition of the sector. Certainly an increased lobbying role. I was at the SLCC's Wales conference a few weeks ago with Chris, the president of the SLCC here, where David Jones, Secretary of State, spoke. And he actually said the problem with this sector, it doesn't stamp its feet hard enough. And I absolutely agree with him. We haven't stamped our feet hard enough. And I think if we are going to be seen as the bodies that should be the recipients maybe of some of the unitary authority services, we've got to stamp our feet a lot harder about ensuring that revenue follows function. Certainly it's about seeking out collaboration partners, working with people like Gareth and Lee, but also in terms of collaboration partners, I've put forward an idea that One Voice Wales should perhaps be the procurement body for the sector in Wales. Rather than you individually going through and procuring certain services, that actually the services came right through us. There'd be huge economies of scale potential. Think of insurance. What if you've got the 3 or 4 big insurance providers actually came to One Voice Wales? We negotiated a much lower rate. So there's opportunities there for the sector. But we need our membership to get behind us and engage in those debates. Certainly about the promotion of the role of the sector. Again, turning things on its head. The way One Voice Wales has done it in the first 9 years, we've not actually had a stakeholder conference where we've invited in partner organisations to kind of look at the great things that the community town council sector is going to do. That's one of the things I want to achieve in the coming months, is to have a stakeholder conference where people get to hear about Cadwallader and the tourism, Pentland, and actually sort of start to see the sector in a slightly different way. It's certainly going to be about a focus on improvement and learning. The former minister, Carl Sargent, asked me back in January, where do you see One Voice Wales going? As a lobbying body? And I sort of said, yeah, we will be. That'll be a part of our role. Naturally, we're a membership body. But I think the emphasis for One Voice Wales, the huge amount of our work, should be around improvement and development. And I think that's really where we're going to sort of put a lot of effort into over the coming months. Broadening the training offering, we've been quite successful over the last few years in running training programmes for the sector. We're broadening that. We're recognising that there's new skill sets required. So we've been quite successful in getting funding to develop a range of new courses around health and safety, emergency planning, perhaps around community cohesion, around social enterprise. We're working with Gareth about. So there's a better understanding because that knowledge is required. If we're going to do more, we've got to have those skills. We're certainly going to be about being an information-driven organisation, more sector surveys. When I go and have conversations with other organisations, I'll give you for example, I was asked by the Public Services Commission on Thursday, how many councils do such? I said, I don't know. We don't carry out an omnibus survey annually as an organisation. We haven't got the funding to do it. It costs money. But if we could do it once, so I know that we've got Welsh Government colleagues here today, if we can establish a model, then we can then just roll that over, because the granularity of information that we require to lobby hard on behalf of the sector needs to be increased. It is about improving communications. I think I've got to get up into the real world, and I know Gareth does his tweets and stuff, and that's a bit new for me. So I've just got to get up to the pace, but that's the sort of thing that I've got to do in terms of my own leadership of One Voice Wales. Finally, and you'll be pleased to note, because you're all starving, and the exhibitors are wondering where the heck you are, we'll continue to influence on policy. I think, unashamedly, and some of this will sound braggadocio, but I muscled my way into a number of advisory groups so that the sector is being represented. And it's pleasing that when reports come out, like John Davis's independent advisory group report on planning, has references clearly now that there is a role for the future for community and town councils in the planning process, a more defined role. I'll stop there. I know you all want food, and probably time for maybe 1 or 2 quick questions. Are you going to ask me questions over lunch as well?